The drought ruined everything. Thomas Mercer stood at his kitchen window in the gray dawn, staring at fields that should have been golden with wheat. Instead, brown stubble stretched toward the horizon like a graveyard of broken promises. 6 months without rain. 6 months watching his crops wither. 6 months sinking deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. Behind him, the cabin held only silence and cold. He turned from the window and surveyed what remained. 3 eggs in a bowl, half a sack of cornmeal, the weevils probably already finding their way in. A handful of dried beans, Christmas morning, and his children would wake to nothing. 4 tin plates sat on the table in a perfect row. Mary's, Samuel's, Joseph's, little Ruth's. He'd laid them out last night after the children finally slept, some desperate habit trying to pretend normalcy. Ruth's wooden spoon rested beside her plate, carved by Sarah 2 Christmases ago when their daughter was still learning to feed herself. Sarah. Thomas pressed his palms against the table edge, head bowing. 8 months since the fever took her. 8 months of stumbling through each day like a man walking through fog, trying to be both mother and father to 4 grieving children while the world collapsed around them. He'd failed at the crops, failed at keeping them fed, failed at everything that mattered. The stockings hung from the mantel, limp and empty. The children had hung them anyway, hope flickering in faces too thin, too pale. He'd promised nothing, but they'd hung them just the same, above him. The loft creaked, small feet padding across rough boards. "Papa!" Ruth's voice drifted down, soft and uncertain. "Is it Christmas?" Thomas's throat closed. He gripped the table harder, knuckles white, unable to find words. What could he say? Yes, it's Christmas. But there's no food, no gifts. No reason to celebrate anything except that we're still breathing more movement from the loft. Mary's voice. Older, trying to sound cheerful. "Merry Christmas. Ruthie, let's let Papa sleep a bit longer." But Thomas wasn't sleeping. He was standing in his kitchen, staring at empty plates, wondering how much longer he could keep pretending he knew what he was doing. Outside, the Wyoming wind moaned across frozen ground. The fire in the hearth had burned down to coals. He should build it up, make the cabin warm for when the children came down. Should heat water for coffee, except they'd run out of coffee 3 weeks ago. Should do 1,000 things he no longer had the strength or resources for. He heard them whispering above. Heard Joseph ask if there might be something in the stockings. Heard Mary's gentle, lying reassurance. Thomas closed his eyes and tried to remember how to pray. The rattle of wagon wheels cut through the morning silence. Thomas's head snapped up. No one came out here anymore. Not since Sarah died. Not since the crops failed and he'd stopped attending church. Unable to face the pity in their eyes or answer their well-meaning questions about how he was managing. He wasn't managing. Everyone knew it. He moved to the window. A wagon approached up the frozen path, pulled by a sturdy mare, a single figure driving, Abigail Morrison. Thomas blinked, uncertain he was seeing right. The spinster who lived alone on her parents' old place 3 miles south. The woman the town called peculiar because she refused every suitor, ran her own farm, and spoke her mind like a man. He'd exchanged perhaps 10 words with her in his life, all of them at the mercantile or after church when Sarah was still alive. What was she doing here on Christmas morning? The wagon pulled up before his cabin. Abigail climbed down with efficient grace, her dark coat buttoned against the cold, breath clouding white in the frozen air. She didn't knock, didn't call out tentatively. She simply looked at his door and spoke like she expected to be heard. "Merry Christmas. Thomas, help me unload." He opened the door slowly, stepping out onto the porch. "Miss Morrison, Abigail." She was already at the wagon bed, pulling back the canvas covering. "And before you start making excuses, I grew extra this year. Would have gone to waste." Thomas moved closer, confused and wary. Then he saw what lay beneath the canvas. A smoked ham, easily 15 pounds, sacks of potatoes and carrots, flour, sugar, salt, dried apples, a tin of lard, real coffee beans, and tucked in the corner, a small paper bag of peppermint sticks. His vision blurred. He couldn't breathe right. I can't. His voice came out hoarse. I have no way to repay you. I don't have anything to. Did I ask for payment? Abigail lifted a sack of potatoes, testing its weight. I said I grew extra. Your pride is your business, Thomas. But if you let good food freeze in this wagon while your children go hungry on Christmas, that becomes foolishness. The cabin door creaked behind him. Thomas turned. All 4 children stood in the doorway. Mary held Ruth's hand. Samuel and Joseph pressed forward, eyes wide and disbelieving. They stared at the wagon like it had materialized from one of their mother's old fairy stories. Ruth's small voice broke the silence. Is that real food? Papa? Thomas tried to speak. Nothing came out. He looked back at Abigail, this strange woman who'd driven out in the cold to save them, and found he couldn't form words for what he felt. Shame and gratitude twisted together until he couldn't tell which was which. Abigail met his eyes. No pity there. Just clear-eyed understanding and a challenge: accept this or don't. But make the choice quickly because the morning is cold and those children are hungry. Help me carry it inside, she said simply. Ham needs to go in the oven soon if we want Christmas dinner before nightfall. Mary moved first, flying down the porch steps toward the wagon. Samuel and Joseph followed. Ruth tugged at Thomas's sleeve. Papa, is the lady an angel? Thomas looked at Abigail Morrison, who was already directing his children on which items to carry, treating them like capable people instead of burdens. Her face was plain but strong, her movements sure and competent. No, he said quietly. Just a neighbor. Why? But watching her hand Ruth the bag of peppermint sticks and seeing his daughter's face light up like sunrise. Thomas wondered if maybe Ruth had it right after all. The cabin transformed. Abigail moved through his kitchen with quiet authority, not asking permission or waiting for direction. She built up the fire until it roared, heat pushing back the cold that had claimed the space for months. She found his largest pot, filled it with water, set it to boil. She unwrapped the ham and prepared it for roasting with herbs Thomas didn't know he still had, tucked away in jars Sarah had labeled in her careful handwriting. The children orbited her like small planets around the sun. Mary, wash those potatoes in the basin. Please. Samuel, I need kindling split for keeping the fire steady. Joseph, you're in charge of stirring this gravy gently now. No splashing. Ruth, sit right here and tell me if that ham starts to smell done. She gave orders without condescension, trusted them with real tasks. Thomas watched from the doorway to the bedroom, unable to fully enter the scene. It felt like trespassing on something that belonged to another life, another man's family. But the smell of roasting meat filled the cabin. Real food. Cooking. His stomach cramped with hunger he'd been ignoring for weeks. Abigail glanced at him. Coffee's ready. Pour yourself a cup and sit down before you fall down. It wasn't a suggestion. Thomas obeyed. Surprising himself, he poured real coffee into his tin cup and sat at his own table like a guest in his own home. The first sip nearly made him weep. He couldn't remember the last time something tasted this good. Ruth abandoned her ham-watching post and climbed onto his lap, sticky peppermint fingers clutching his shirt. Papa, are we having Christmas now? Yes, sweetheart. His voice cracked. We're having Christmas. Hours passed in a warm blur. The ham cooked golden. Potatoes mashed with butter Abigail had brought. Gravy thickened. Biscuits rose in the oven, their tops browning perfectly. Mary set the table with their few dishes, adding wildflowers she'd somehow preserved from last summer as a centerpiece. When they finally sat down to eat, the table groaned with food. Thomas stared at it, overwhelmed. His children stared too, uncertain, as if the feast might vanish if they reached for it. Abigail bowed her head. Let's say grace. They joined hands around the table. Ruth's small fingers in Thomas's right hand, Abigail's calloused, strong ones in his left. The touch startled him the first time he'd held a woman's hand since Sarah's funeral. For food in winter, Abigail said quietly. For friends in need. For second chances we don't deserve but receive anyway. Amen. Amen, the children echoed. Then they ate. Thomas watched his children devour ham and potatoes. Watched color return to their cheeks. Heard laughter bubble up between bites. Samuel told a joke. Joseph laughed so hard milk came out his nose. Mary smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months, and Abigail sat among them like she belonged there, passing dishes, wiping Ruth's chin, listening to Joseph's rambling story about a frog he'd found last summer. She didn't talk down to them, didn't treat them like charity cases, just listened and responded like their words mattered. Thomas looked at her across the table. This strange woman the town called peculiar, and saw something he'd been too proud or too grief-stricken to see before, intelligence in those steady eyes, kindness that didn't need recognition, strength that didn't demand submission. She was whole unto herself, complete, yet choosing to share that completeness with people who had nothing to offer in return. After dinner, Mary's voice broke the comfortable silence. Will you stay for games, Miss Morrison? Abigail glanced at Thomas. A question in her eyes, is that all right? He nodded, unable to voice what he was feeling. Please don't leave yet. Please don't take this warmth away. I'd love to, Abigail said. And Ruth cheered. Abigail played blindman's bluff with children who'd forgotten how to play. Thomas watched from his chair, coffee growing cold in his hands, as this woman spun in circles with a dish towel tied over her eyes while his children scattered, giggling. She caught Joseph first, swung him around until he squealed with laughter, then caught Samuel trying to tiptoe past. The cabin rang with noise. Real noise. Living noise. Not the hollow silence that had pressed down on them for months. When Abigail pulled off the blindfold, her hair had come loose from its pins. She didn't bother fixing it. Just smiled at the children's flushed faces and reached into her coat pocket. I almost forgot, she said, producing 4 peppermint sticks, 1 for each of you. The children stared like she'd offered diamonds. Ruth's hand trembled as she accepted hers. Really, really, Abigail's voice was gentle. Merry Christmas. They sucked on peppermint sticks with reverent concentration, making them last. Thomas remembered the taste from his own childhood's sugar and mint. The luxury of sweetness. His children hadn't tasted sugar in months. Thank you, Mary whispered. Tears tracked down her cheeks. Thank you so much. Abigail pulled the girl into a hug, casual and natural, like she'd been hugging these children all their lives. You're welcome, sweetheart. Evening fell. Abigail coaxed the children into teaching her a clapping game, getting deliberately tangled in her own hands until they laughed at her mistakes. Then she settled into Sarah's old rocking chair and began a story. Once there was a dragon, she said, who lived alone in a mountain cave. The children gathered at her feet. Even Thomas found himself listening. Everyone feared the dragon because he was large and breathed fire. But the truth was, the dragon was lonely. He'd lived so long in his cave, guarding his treasure, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have a friend. Ruth climbed into Abigail's lap, thumb in mouth, eyes drooping. Abigail's hand rose automatically to stroke the child's hair and unconscious, nurturing gesture that made Thomas's chest ache. He saw his daughter relax completely, trusting this near stranger with the weight of her tired body. Then one day, a princess came to the mountain, but she didn't come to slay the dragon. She came because she'd heard he was lonely, and she knew what that felt like. Joseph leaned against Abigail's knee. Did they become friends? They did. The princess visited every day. She taught the dragon to laugh again, and the dragon taught her to be brave. Neither of them was lonely anymore. The story's message wasn't subtle. Thomas heard it clearly. Loneliness can be chosen differently. Connection is possible. Even dragons deserve companionship. When the story ended, Ruth was asleep in Abigail's arms. The other children were yawning. Thomas stood, suddenly uncertain. "I should make coffee," he said, needing something to do with his hands. "That would be nice." Abigail's voice was soft, careful not to wake Ruth. He made coffee while Mary helped Samuel and Joseph to the loft. Soon only the two adults remained downstairs, the cabin quiet except for crackling fire and children's soft breathing above. Thomas handed Abigail a cup and sat across from her. Words pressed against his throat, too big and too confused to name. Finally, he just asked the simplest question. "Why?" She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Why help you?" "You could have given to the church, to any of the families in town who haven't—" He stopped. "Failed." He wanted to say, "who haven't failed as completely as I have." YSR Abigail looked down at Ruth sleeping in her lap. Her fingers traced the child's fine hair gently. "Because no child should suffer for circumstances beyond their control," she said. "Because your wife was kind to me once when others weren't. She invited me to a quilting bee when the other women made excuses because it's Christmas, Thomas, and I was alone too." The last words fell soft as snow. "I was alone too." Thomas studied her face in the firelight, saw the truth there. This capable, independent woman who the town called strange because she didn't fit their expectations, she'd been lonely, watching families from the outside, holding her competence and her worth close because no one else seemed to want them. "You could have any man in the territory," he said. "I don't want any man." Her eyes met his, clear and direct. "I want a partner. There's a difference." The words hung between them. Thomas understood suddenly that this woman wouldn't accept half measures, wouldn't settle for someone who wanted a housekeeper or a broodmare. She wanted equality, respect, someone who saw her full worth and matched it. He looked away, humbled. What did he have to offer? Failed crops, a broken-down cabin, 4 children, grief still raw in his chest. He was nothing she should want, but she'd come anyway, chosen them anyway. "Stay tonight," he said abruptly. "It's too cold, too dark to drive home safely. Please." Abigail searched his face. Something shifted in her expression, a wall lowering. Just slightly. "I'll sleep by the fire. I'll get blankets." As Thomas climbed to the loft for bedding, Ruth still sleeping in Abigail's arms below. He felt something stir in his chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe the space where hope could grow. Thomas woke before dawn and found Abigail already dressed, building up the fire, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. She glanced at him, offering a small smile. "Morning?" "Morning." His voice came out rough. "Sleep all right?" "Well enough." A lie. Probably. The floor wasn't comfortable, but she didn't complain. She made breakfast from the provision she'd brought: real eggs, fried with bits of ham, biscuits from yesterday, warmed by the fire, coffee that tasted like luxury. The children came down one by one, still sleepy, and ate with the same reverent concentration they'd shown at dinner. Thomas should feel grateful. He did feel grateful, but something else gnawed at him. A question he couldn't quite articulate. After breakfast, he followed Abigail to the barn where her wagon waited. She was checking the harness, preparing to leave. And the thought of her going made his chest tight. "Abigail," she turned, eyebrows raised. "The food you brought, the supplies." He forced the words out. "That was more than extra from a garden." Her face went carefully neutral. "I had a good harvest. I saw the Morrison estate sale at the Mercantile last week." Thomas stepped closer. "Saw the jewelry in the window, your mother's pieces." Abigail went very still. "The jewelry's gone now," he continued. "Sold. And then you show up here with a wagon full of food and supplies worth more than most folks earn in a season. Her jaw tightened. Thomas, you didn't have extra... The words came out harder than he intended, anger and shame twisting together. You bought all this? Sold your mother's jewelry to buy food for my family. Abigail turned fully toward him, and he saw fire in her eyes. And what if I did? What business is it of yours? What I do with my own possessions? You shouldn't have... Don't! She held up a hand, voice sharp as winter wind. Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't do. I'm 32 years old. Thomas Mercer, I know my own mind. Those jewels were metal and stones collecting dust while living children went hungry. I made my choice. But your mother's things. My mother is dead. Abigail's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. Been dead 6 years now. She can't wear those jewels. Can't be hurt by my selling them. But your children are alive, and they were suffering. And I could stop that suffering. So I did. Thomas stared at her, at this fierce, extraordinary woman who'd given up her inheritance for strangers. You barely know us. I know enough. She gestured toward the cabin. I know you're doing your best with impossible circumstances. I know your children are good-hearted despite their hardship. I know you loved your wife and honor her memory. I know you're drowning and too proud to call for help. Her words struck like physical blows. Thomas's throat closed. I chose this, Abigail said more quietly. Don't take my choice away by making it about your pride. What I did because I wanted to. Because it mattered. Because those 4 children deserved to have Christmas. She was magnificent. Standing in his barn in the gray dawn, defending her right to be generous, claiming her own agency with both hands. Thomas had never met anyone like her. Thank you, he managed, inadequate words. But all he had. Thank you. Abigail's expression softened. She touched his arm briefly, a quick, gentle contact. You're welcome. They stood in silence for a moment. Thomas tried to think of something else to say, some way to express what he felt. Gratitude. Yes. But also recognition, respect. A stirring of something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Stay for the day, he said finally. Please, one more day. Thomas, people will talk. Let them talk. He surprised himself with his vehemence. Stay! Abigail studied his face. Something flickered in her eyes, hope. Maybe. Or curiosity about what this meant. All right, she said softly. One more day. Sunday morning arrived cold and bright. Thomas stood in his bedroom, attempting to make himself presentable for church. The children dressed in the loft above, their best clothes worn thin but clean. Abigail had spent Saturday helping organize the cabin, wash laundry, prepare the week's meals. Her efficiency astonished him. What had felt overwhelming and impossible for one man became manageable with her help, but now worry ate at him. You don't have to come, he said as Abigail emerged from the room where she'd spent another night. To church. People will... I know what people will say. She adjusted her bonnet with calm fingers. I've heard their whispers my whole life. Thomas. Strange Abigail Morrison who won't marry. Peculiar woman living alone. I've survived worse than gossip. But if you're here, with us, after staying 2 nights, then let them draw their conclusions. Her eyes met his, steady and sure. I won't hide like I've done something shameful. Have I? No. The word came out fierce. No, you haven't. Then we attend church, together. The walk into town felt longer than usual. The children chattered, happy with full bellies and clean clothes. Thomas's shoulders grew tenser with each step. Abigail walked beside him, head high, giving no sign of nervousness, though he knew she must feel it too. They weren't the first to arrive at the small church, but they weren't the last either. Perfect timing to be noticed by everyone. The effect was immediate. Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her chest, her eyes widening. She leaned toward her husband, whispering urgently behind her gloved hand. Mr. Peterson paused mid-conversation with the sheriff, his gaze tracking from Thomas to Abigail and back. Young Mrs. Cooper, who'd always been kind, looked away quickly, color rising in her cheeks. The congregation's collective intake of breath was almost audible. Thomas felt his children notice the stares. Mary's hand found his. Samuel moved closer. Even Joseph and Ruth sensed something wrong, their earlier happiness dimming. "Keep walking," Abigail murmured. "Heads up." They walked through the gauntlet of judgment. Conversation stopped mid-word. The Henderson family physically turned their backs as they passed. Old Mr. Sullivan's face twisted with disapproval. Only Reverend Patterson's wife offered a small, uncertain smile. They found a pew one that emptied as they approached, families suddenly deciding they preferred sitting elsewhere. Thomas's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Beside him, Abigail sat with perfect composure, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. But he saw the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. This was his fault. She'd helped them, and now she'd be branded as improper, maybe worse. The town would assume God. What would they assume a widow and a widower? Unchaperoned under one roof. Never mind the 4 children. Never mind her kindness or his desperation. They'd reduce it to something dirty. The service began. Reverend Patterson climbed to his pulpit, his gaze sweeping the congregation. When his eyes found Thomas and Abigail, he paused. The pause stretched too long. Meaningful. "Today's sermon," the Reverend began, "is on charity and judgment. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Judge not, that ye be not judged." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a spotlight. Everyone knew who he was talking about, who he was defending or condemning. Thomas's hands curled into fists. Beside him, Ruth leaned into Abigail's side. Abigail's arm went around the child naturally, protectively. A dozen heads turned to stare at the gesture. Let them stare, let them whisper. This woman had saved his family when the whole town stood by and watched them starve. She had more courage and kindness in one finger than most of these people had in their entire bodies. But the weight of their judgment pressed down like a physical thing. And Thomas knew, sitting in that pew surrounded by cold faces, that a choice was coming. Continue down this path and face ostracism, or step back, protect what little standing he had left. Let Abigail go back to her lonely farm and his family go back to slowly starving with dignity intact. The sermon continued. Thomas heard none of it. All he heard was the whisper of his own fear. After church, the shunning became official. Mrs. Cooper, who'd brought soup after Sarah's death, turned away when Thomas tried to greet her. The Henderson family walked a wide circle around them on the church steps. Even kind old Reverend Patterson's handshake felt perfunctory. His eyes troubled. Samuel came home with a bloody nose. Thomas saw it as the boy climbed down from the wagon, his split lip, his swelling eye, his torn shirt. Mary and Joseph hovered nearby, frightened. Ruth started to cry. What happened? Thomas gripped Samuel's shoulders gently. Tommy Henderson said, the boy's voice broke. He said Miss Morrison was a bad woman, that she was... His face flushed with shame at repeating the words. I hit him. I hit him hard. Thomas pulled his son against his chest. You defended her honor. Reverend Patterson said I shouldn't fight. But I couldn't let him say those things. Papa, I couldn't. I know. Thomas held the boy tight. I know. Inside, Abigail cleaned Samuel's face with gentle efficiency, checking for serious injury, finding none. But the damage went deeper than a bloody nose. The children were quiet at dinner. The easy laughter from earlier days had vanished, replaced by anxiety. After the children were in bed, Abigail began packing. Thomas found her in the barn, loading her wagon by lamplight. Her movements were methodical, controlled. but he saw the brightness in her eyes that meant tears held barely in check. "What are you doing?" "Leaving." She didn't look at him. "I should have left after Christmas." "Staying was selfish." "Selfish!" His voice rose. "You gave up your mother's jewelry for us, and you call yourself selfish. I made your situation worse." Now she did look at him, and her face was anguished. "Your son came home bleeding because of me. Your daughters couldn't meet anyone's eyes at church. The town can go to hell." The words burst out, surprising both of them. Abigail's hands stilled on the wagon. "Thomas, do you know what I saw today? I saw a woman who sat with dignity while small-minded people judged her, who comforted my daughter even though she knew it would make the gossip worse, who's shown my children more kindness in 4 days than that entire town has shown in 8 months. But the cost is you leaving." Thomas moved closer. "You driving away and us going back to being alone. That's the cost I can't bear." Abigail's face crumpled. "I won't be the reason your children suffer more. They've suffered enough." "And what about what they want?" His voice gentled. "They love you. Ruth calls you Mama when she's half asleep. Joseph asked me yesterday if you might stay forever. They've had 4 days of being children again instead of survivors. Don't take that away because you're trying to protect us." "I am trying to protect you." Her voice broke. "Because I—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Because what?" She turned away. "Because I care too much. Because I've been alone my entire life, and these 4 days have been—" Her shoulders shook. "I can't do this. I can't walk away. But I have to." Thomas stepped around to face her, saw tears on her cheeks, saw the raw pain in her eyes. This strong, capable woman who'd saved them was breaking. "Then don't," he said. "Don't walk away. Thomas, be reasonable." "I've been reasonable my whole life. Reasonable and proud and so damned lonely I forgot what it felt like to be alive." His voice roughened. "Then you came, and for 4 days I've remembered. My children have remembered. You brought more than food. Abigail, you brought light back into this house. But the town will talk regardless." He caught her hands in his, calloused palms against calloused palms. "Two people who knew what hard work felt like. Let me worry about the town. Right now. I need to know, do you want to leave? Really want to—" Abigail's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "But wanting something doesn't make it right." "Maybe it does." Thomas held her gaze. "Maybe wanting it, choosing it, fighting for it, maybe that's what makes it right." She searched his face, desperate and hopeful at once. "What are you saying?" He didn't have an answer yet. Not fully, but standing in his barn, holding this woman's hands, feeling her tremble with withheld tears, something in him shifted, settled, chose. "Give me tonight," he said. "Let me think. Don't leave until morning, please." Abigail nodded slowly. Morning. He left her there and retreated to his barn office, a small space with a desk and a lamp and memories. Sat in the darkness with his head in his hands. For 8 months he'd been half alive, going through motions, providing the bare minimum to keep his children fed and sheltered. He'd convinced himself that was enough. That surviving was the only goal that mattered. But Abigail had shown him differently, had shown him what living could look like. Partnership, laughter, someone to share the burden and the joy. His hand went to his pocket, found the small object he'd carried there for months. Sarah's wedding ring. Gold worn thin from years of work. A tiny scratch on the band where she'd knocked it against the stove. He pulled it out, held it in the lamplight. "I think I'm ready to live again," he said aloud to the empty barn, to the memory of his wife. To the wind outside. "I hope that's all right." The ring caught the light. Thomas stared at it for a long moment. Then he tucked it carefully into his desk drawer, not discarding it, but releasing his grip on it. Honoring the past by making room for the future, he stood, walked back toward the cabin where lamplight glowed in windows, where Abigail would be checking on sleeping children one last time before her own rest, where his family broken but healing waited. Outside the barn. He stopped, took a breath of frozen air, made his choice. Then he walked toward the wagon where Abigail stood, her back to him, shoulders set with dignity even in her pain. Abigail. She turned. Thomas's voice cut through the night. Abigail turned, and he saw moonlight catch on her wet cheeks. She'd been crying. This strong woman who'd faced down the town's judgment with her head high had finally let herself break. It undid something in him. Why did you really help us? He moved closer, each step deliberate. The truth. Abigail. Not the polite answer. The real one. Her breath misted in the cold air. Thomas, I told you. Tell me again. You knew. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture, protecting something vulnerable. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was tired of being alone. Because I've spent 32 years being called strange and peculiar and wrong for not wanting what other women want. Because I saw you struggling and I knew I could help. And what good is capability if you hoard it? The words spilled faster now. Pressure finally released. Because your children deserved better and you deserved better, and I was so tired of watching life happen to other people while I stood on the outside looking in. Or why us specifically? Because... She stopped, pressing her lips together. Abigail, please. Because when I looked at you that day in town, when I saw you trying to sell your good saddle for nothing so you could buy flour, I saw myself alone, proud, barely holding on. Tears streamed freely now. And I thought if I could help you, maybe I could prove I mattered to someone. That I wasn't just strange old Abigail Morrison who'd die alone in that house my parents built. Thomas's chest felt crushed. This remarkable woman had been invisible to him until 4 days ago. Invisible to everyone, judged for her strength when she should have been celebrated for it. I saw your kindness, he said, voice rough. Your intelligence, your strength. The way my children love you already. Thomas. The way you fill this place with life again. He stepped closer, close enough to see her face clearly in the moonlight. I've been half dead for 8 months. Abigail. Going through the motions, keeping my children fed, telling myself that was enough. Then you came. And I remembered what living feels like. You don't owe me. This isn't about owing. He caught her hand, held it between both of his. You said you want a partner. Someone who sees your full worth. Yes. Then marry me. The words fell into the frozen night. Simple. Direct. True. Abigail went utterly still. What? Marry me. Thomas's heart hammered, but his voice stayed steady. Not for convenience, not for charity. For partnership. For... He swallowed. For love. If you'll give me time to prove I can offer it. Thomas, you can't. The town, your children. You're not thinking. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months. He squeezed her hand gently. You want a partner I'm offering? You want someone who sees you? I see you. Abigail Morrison. I see a woman who sacrificed her inheritance for strangers. Who plays games with children who've forgotten how to laugh. Who stands with dignity while small people judge her. I see strength and kindness in everything I'd given up hoping to find. I'm not... She struggled for words. You could do better. A younger woman, someone the town approves of. I don't want the town's approval. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I want you. Your strength. Your honesty. Your terrible cooking. My cooking isn't terrible. She protested through tears and something that might have been laughter. It's not great. A smile tugged at his mouth. But I'll eat it anyway if you'll stay. Abigail stared at him, lips trembling, hope and fear warring in her face. I'm 32. Past the age most women marry. I'm set in my ways. I speak my mind. I won't be docile or good, Thomas said firmly. I don't want docile. I want you. Exactly as you are, strange, peculiar, wonderful you. Your children love you. Haven't you noticed Ruth sleeps better with you near? Samuel defends your honor. Mary smiles again. Joseph talks your ear off. They need you as much as I do. The town will never accept, then we'll make our own community right here. He gestured toward the cabin. You and me and 4 children who need a family. That's enough. That's everything. Abigail's face crumpled. She pulled her hand free and covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking. Thomas's heart sank. He'd pushed too hard, moved too fast. I thought you'd never ask, came her muffled voice. He froze. What? She lowered her hands, and she was smiling through tears. I thought you'd never ask, you stubborn, proud, beautiful fool. Is that yes? Yes? The word came out on a sob. Yes, Thomas. Yes to partnership. Yes to your children. Yes to making a family from broken pieces. Yes to everything. Relief and joy crashed through him. Thomas pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly. Pressing her face against his shoulder, they stood like that in the moonlight. 2 lonely people choosing each other, choosing life. Behind them, the cabin door burst open. 4 children tumbled out, cheering and whooping. They must have been watching from the window. You're staying! Ruth shrieked. Mama's staying! Abigail laughed and cried at the same time as the children mobbed them. 4 small bodies pressing close, all talking at once. Will you really be our mama now? Joseph demanded. Can we call you Mama? Mary asked shyly. I knew it. Samuel crowed. I knew Papa would ask. Ruth just wrapped her arms around Abigail's legs and held on like she'd never let go. Thomas met Abigail's eyes over the children's heads, saw his future there, saw home, saw the life he'd thought died with Sarah coming back in a different form, not a replacement, but a new chapter, one that honored the past by embracing the future. Yes, Abigail told the children, voice thick with emotion. You can call me Mama, if you want to. We want to, they said together, and standing in the frozen December night, surrounded by children and noise and love, Thomas Mercer finally came back to life. Reverend Patterson married them the following Sunday. The church was nearly empty. Mrs. Patterson attended, of course, and old Mr. Sullivan surprised everyone by coming, grumbling that he wouldn't miss a wedding just because some folks were fools. The Henderson family stayed home. Most of the town stayed home, but the few who came brought their presents like gifts. Thomas didn't care about the empty pews. He cared about Abigail standing beside him in her best dress, simple brown wool, but she'd pinned wildflowers in her hair. He cared about his children in the front row, scrubbed and solemn and hopeful. He cared about the words they spoke, promising partnership and faithfulness and choosing each other every day. When Reverend Patterson said, "You may kiss your bride," Thomas cupped Abigail's face gently and kissed her like sealing a promise, like coming home. The children cheered. Even Mr. Sullivan clapped. Winter passed. It was still hard. The crops had failed. Money was scarce. The cold bit deep. But Abigail's savings from selling the jewelry, combined with Thomas's land and determination, saw them through. They worked side by side, repairing the fence, organizing the barn, preparing for spring planting. Abigail moved into the cabin completely, bringing her belongings, her efficiency, her laughter. The children bloomed under her care. Ruth followed her everywhere, chattering constantly. Mary learned to preserve vegetables, to plan meals, to manage a household. Samuel and Joseph helped with farm work, growing stronger, more confident. At night, Thomas and Abigail sat by the fire after the children slept. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together, comfortable in silence, learning each other's rhythms, building partnership through daily choices. The town gradually, grudgingly, accepted them, or at least stopped actively shunning them. Mrs. Cooper brought a pie. Sheepish and apologetic, the Henderson family remained distant, but others warmed. Abigail's competence was impossible to ignore, and Thomas's children's obvious happiness wore down even the hardest hearts. Spring arrived. Thomas stood in his field in early morning light, running soil through his fingers. Rich earth, ready for planting, behind him. Abigail approached with a basket of seed. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready." They planted together, side by side, wheat and corn, row after careful row. The children helped when they returned from school, yes, school. Because Abigail had insisted education mattered more than farm work, and Thomas had agreed. Evening fell. They gathered around the dinner table, a table that now held plenty. Thomas looked at his family, Mary helping Ruth with her letters, Samuel and Joseph arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, Abigail serving stew, her hair escaping its pins, her face tired but content. This was life. Not perfect. Not easy, but enough. After dinner, they held hands for grace. Ruth had requested that Thomas lead the prayer tonight. He bowed his head. "For unexpected grace," he said quietly. "For second chances. For the woman who drove up in a wagon on Christmas morning and saved us. For 4 children who remembered how to laugh. For a family built from broken pieces. For the courage to choose life even when grief says no. Amen. Amen," they echoed. Later, after the children were finally in bed, Thomas and Abigail stood on the porch together. Stars blazed overhead, infinite and cold and beautiful. Spring air carried the promise of warmth to come. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Ruth had begged before sleep. "About the Christmas you came." And Abigail had settled on the edge of the bed. 4 children gathered close and begun once. On the coldest morning of the year, a lonely woman hitched up her wagon. Now. Abigail leaned against Thomas's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her waist, holding her close. "Regrets?" he asked softly. "Not one." She tilted her face toward his. "You? Not one." She smiled. "Liar, you regret my cooking. Your cooking is getting better." "Still a liar." But she was laughing. Thomas kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair soap and sunshine and home. Across the greening fields, dawn was coming. Another day, another choice to keep building this life together. "I love you," he said. Simple words, but weighted with months of shared work, shared laughter, shared purpose. Abigail turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. "I love you too." Inside, one of the children stirred, calling out. Abigail moved to go inside, and Thomas followed. Always following, always beside her, always together. The frontier was still hard. Winter would come again. Crops might fail again. Life offered no guarantees except that hardship was certain. But standing in the doorway of his cabin, watching his wife comfort their daughter, Thomas Mercer knew one truth absolutely: he was no longer alone. None of them were. They'd built a family from choice and kindness and stubborn hope. And that was enough. That was everything. The dawn light touched the horizon, promising another day. They would face it together.